I think it's pretty safe to say that these last few years, Capcom has been on an absolute roll when it comes to their sequels and their remakes. Devil May Cry 5 came out and is officially the highest selling Devil May Cry in the franchise with 6 million units sold. It's also an incredibly good looking game too. Resident Evil 2 Remake came out and in my opinion was phenomenal from top to bottom. The original RE2 is one of my all-time favorite games and I would put the remake up there right alongside it. The development cycle for RE2 Remake was also lightning in a bottle, consisting of developers that worked on the original Resident Evil 2, as well as fans who grew up playing the original game who would become developers and find themselves working at Capcom. That's such an incredibly cool and unique situation. You have Resident Evil 3 Remake, which, while I don't think is a bad game, it clearly didn't have all the love and attention put into it that Resident Evil 2 did. There was the lackluster encounters with Nemesis, the cut content like the clock tower, and overall you just did not spend enough time in Raccoon City getting to explore. You're literally relegated to just a few square blocks to explore, whereas in the original, you spent so much more time in Raccoon City getting to explore such a larger section of the city. So when you did encounter Nemesis, even though those encounters were scripted, they felt spontaneous. I'm also convinced that nobody at Capcom even play tested the higher difficulty settings of Inferno and Nightmare. That shit was insanely unfair and unbalanced and really just kind of cheap.
Inferno? Fuck you, dude. Fuck you. Fuck you asking me to play this game on Inferno.
And then most recently you have Resident Evil 4 Remake, which is astounding. It's selling really well, it's reviewing really well, and it's an incredibly fun and addictive game. It's gotten to the point where over a month later, I'm still playing it. I haven't even gotten to Horizon Burning Shores yet because I keep doing speedruns on Resident Evil 4. And quick shout out to the Krauser battle in RE4. That is something straight out of an 80s action movie, from the atmosphere to the music to the tone to the way you fight Krauser. It's just phenomenal. It's literally like you're fighting a deranged Rambo. So the question that a lot of people are asking now is, where does Capcom go from here? What's next? Do they bring back Mega Man Legends? Do they forego Marvel vs. Capcom and do some sort of Capcom All-Stars game? Do they go back to Code Veronica, which, for me personally, I consider Code Veronica to be a part of the mainline Resident Evil franchise. And I think out of all of the Resident Evil mainline games, Code Veronica would benefit the greatest from having a reimagined remake. And not just for gameplay reasons, but for story reasons. That game is incredibly wacky and out there, and it's super charming, but I think some tweaks here and there to the game's story could make it even better. But if you've finished Resident Evil 4, it seems pretty clear that the next game that Capcom is going to make is an RE5 remake, which, look, I'm all for. The OG RE5 is incredibly fun, especially if you're playing with a friend. And taking the new aspects that were introduced in RE4 Remake, injecting them with steroids, and putting them into an RE5 remake could be pretty astounding. But in my personal opinion, the game that I want to see Capcom remake next and bring back into the fold is Onimusha Warlords. Now, Capcom did release an Onimusha HD remaster a couple of years ago, and although I couldn't find concrete sales numbers, from what I did find, the game did not perform well. In fact, Capcom considered it a failure, which is a bummer. However, just because that remaster failed, I don't think that should preclude Capcom from doing an Onimusha remake. And it's pretty clear that they still have some interest in the franchise. I mean, they just announced an anime last year, which should be arriving sometime this year if I'm not mistaken, so there's still some life in that Onimusha franchise. Now, how do you go about rebooting Onimusha? Well, I don't think you do a sequel, and I don't think you do a new game. You gotta do a remake of the original Onimusha Warlords. Now, as far as the story goes, I wouldn't really change too much. It's a really great classic hero's journey of a lone samurai fighting Nobunaga and his army of demons to save his home. There's some really eerie and creepy monster designs, but there is some cheesiness to the game's overall dialogue and story. So, for me personally, I would tone down that cheesiness and make it a little more dark and a little bit more serious and sinister. Make these monsters really violent and mean-spirited. Kinda do what they did with RE4 Remake. There's still some level of cheese there, but overall it's a much more grounded, serious, and darker tone to that story. And the ending of Onimusha, spoiler alert, is incredibly heartfelt, where Samanosuke becomes this incredible Oni demon and sacrifices himself to kill Nobunaga to save save his home. That's an incredible character development moment for the character, and to see that brought back to life in RE Engine could be phenomenal. Speaking of RE Engine, that engine is insane. What Capcom is able to do with that engine in terms of its graphics, its lighting, its animation, and overall performance is astounding. The one thing it does seem to struggle with is water effects, but let's be honest, games like Resident Evil and Devil May Cry don't really have all that much water in them, so that's not really a big deal breaker for me. But graphically, seeing an RE Engine Onimusha, a super realistic Samanosuke, a Nobunaga, demons that are dripping with blood and gore and viscera all over the place could be really awesome. Not to mention the locales, this is feudal Japan. Seeing all of these different dojos and shrines in these different areas redone in RE Engine could be really awesome. Now next, what do you do with the gameplay? There's a lot of things you can do. You could go the Devil May Cry route and have it be much more heavy on the action emphasis, doing cool combos and juggles. Maybe you take the Resident Evil 4 approach where you put the camera behind Samanosuke, allow him to do melee stuff, and also maybe some projectiles. But the one game I would take inspiration from is none other than Ghost of Tsushima. Now, if you're new to my channel, just a big note here, I love Ghost of Tsushima. That game is phenomenal from top to bottom. The story, the writing, the acting, the gameplay, the dialogue, the music, the exploration. Seriously, Tsushima made me absolutely cry my eyes out by the time I reached the end credits of that game. It's really something spectacular, and I say this every single time I bring the game up, but if you have a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 5 and you haven't played Ghost of Tsushima, what are you doing? You gotta get your hands on that game. It's incredible. And I would take heavy influence on that game's gameplay for an Onimusha remake. Now, the gameplay in Ghost of Tsushima isn't really super deep or complicated. It's essentially a really fun and fancy version of rock, paper, scissors, but the combat itself feels so responsive and fast. And let me tell you, man, landing light attacks and heavy attacks, kicking an opponent in the face, sending them flying, is super satisfying. The one feature you'd have to bring from Ghost of Tsushima into Onimusha, and they did it with RE4 Remake, that's a really good parry system. I'm a sucker for a good ass parry system in a video game. God of War Ragnarok did it, RE4 Remake's done it, Ghost of Tsushima did it really well with the slow-mo, so you gotta bring back a really cool parry system. And instead of doing different fighting stances like they do in Ghost of Tsushima, maybe you can change the stances for Samanosuke based on the weapons he's using. His standard samurai sword, the fire weapons, the lightning and wind weapons can all have their different unique movesets that you have to utilize for certain enemies. The options are really endless, and that's how I would do the gameplay for Onimusha Warlords. Have it really kind of lean into what they did with Ghost of Tsushima. Have Samanosuke be surrounded by large groups of demons and Oni that you really gotta be smart about when you fight. You can't just hack and slash at them. You gotta be a little bit more strategic in how you're gonna approach these situations, and even the bosses. I mean, all you really have to do is take a look at the Ghost of Tsushima Legends multiplayer mode, where you're fighting as undead samurai against legions of Oni creatures. It's essentially what I would want current day Onimusha to be, but with much more horror vibes and spookiness overall. Now, as far as bringing back Samanosuke, that's what I personally would want. I don't know if there's any issues with licensing and rights in regards to the likeness of the actor, but considering they did Onimusha Remaster just a few years ago, I don't think there's going to be too many issues bringing back Samanosuke. So let's do it, Capcom. Come on, let's bring back Onimusha Warlords. Let's give it a second go with the remake. You got an anime coming out soon. What better way to build up hype for a new Onimusha game than with the anime? So I am curious, Corduroy. That's the video. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think of Onimusha Warlords? Would you like to see it make a return in the form of a remake / reimagining? And if so, how would you do it, and what games would you take inspiration from for the gameplay, the graphics, and even the story? We'll see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.